You guys have been, discussing on the atonement. And yesterday, my brother Ashish spoke on the resurrection of Jesus. And we are actually living, at a very dark time in history, let's say. The pandemic and the hope of Easter cannot be any more, let's say, more pronounced than this time, right? Because what did Easter bring to us? Easter brought us that hope that, of Christ to actually raises up humanity with him. And that is a glorious hope that we proclaim, and that is the message of Easter. And that's what, this theme also is, Arise 21. That we thought that 2021 would be better than 2020. Now, 2020 was out of the box for us, and we thought we look forward to 21. And we are already 1/3 of 21 has gone by, and we are now in the middle of this year, and we are still, still that dark and dull period is going on. And our theme itself is Arise 2021. During these dull times, during these dark times, the message of Easter is all about beating it through the hope, to the Christian hope, and going forward. So I really appreciate these meetings, and I hope that you guys are also being benefited through what is being discussed here. So today, in the last day, we'll be discussing on truth, right? So I'll just quickly share my screen, and from there we can go on. So as I said, this, Easter itself is about the proclamation of truth, right? Easter is about the triumph of truth. Jesus said, I am the truth. And Jesus was the embodiment of truth. And when truth was crucified, truth cannot be beaten down, right? It comes back all the more powerfully. And the very truth that was embodied in Christ continues to capture hearts even 20 centuries down the line. And that is the truth that we proclaim. So for us, truth is not merely an abstract idea. Truth is a person. Truth is not something, truth is someone. And that's what Christ proclaimed to be. He said, I am the truth. No one comes to the Father apart through me. So how do we actually defend and proclaim the truth? After Jesus rose again, and when he was going up to heaven, we know the final teaching of Jesus, which we now call the Great Commission, was to go and proclaim this, go and make disciples. And they went from Samaria, and then from Samaria to the ends of the world, they went and proclaimed the truth. The truth also came to us in our homeland, India, right? Across continents, this truth is still transforming people. But we are now living at a time which can be characterized as a post-truth time. What do you mean by post? Post means literally after, right? So we are living at a time which is after truth. I'll just get into that semantics of that word as we go on. But in short, we are living at a time when it is very difficult, or let's say increasingly, people get uncomfortable when we actually have a discussion about truth, particularly religious truth. So how can we go on? So the last 2 days, you saw a defense of the atonement, you saw a defense of the resurrection of Jesus, and I think we are all convinced that this really happened. This is the truth. This is the truth that people need to hear. But how do we go about and speak the truth to their ears and courageously defend it? That's number one. But also defend it in a way that we don't look as bigots or idiots at the end of the day. I mean, we need to be more, let's say, compassionate and more even tactful when we are talking about the truth of Jesus. And so what I'll be doing today is I'll be, first, once we settle the definitions, we'll go through some different views of truth, which is prevalent in the college campus, not just the college campus, but also in the work campuses that you go. Maybe the people who actually exhibit those ideas may not be really aware of what an academic term for those, philosophy that they are practicing. But when I go on, you will understand that these are the kind of people that you meet and you have met before. And these are the kind of views that we regularly see in the college campus. And I will actually go through them very quickly and in a very simple manner. We will deconstruct those views, and then we will defend what we can, what the true nature of truth is, or what truth is by definition exclusive, right? When we say that Jesus is the way to God, it implicitly means that Jesus is the only way to God, right? And we are living, let's say, even in our country, we live, in a country of over 33 crore gods, and each region has its own temple and rituals and gods and goddesses. How do we actually talk to those people? Now, that is the Orthodox Hindu society that I'm talking about. But even when you go to the modern campus, or the, let's say, the millennials, the people of in and around our age, 20, or let's say 25, under 25, you will see that they are mostly, they are folks who are not very religious. For them, truth is a byword. It does not really matter. And their response is usually, whatever, I don't really care. So how can we actually navigate across these views and respond to them in a way that makes sense, and does not actually shut down the conversation, but can at least move them from point A to B or point C? If it not, maybe you can't take the person from point A to point Z, but at least we can slowly move the needle of the conversation and take them to the truth, which is Jesus Christ. So let's get started. And as we go by, I would really appreciate if you can also have a pen and paper with you, or probably on your phone or tablet, whatever. You can note down questions. You can note down if you want to discuss something, you can note it down. I would be I would be willing to stay back, and we can discuss questions and concerns that can be really taken up. So I would really appreciate if you have any doubts, note it down. Sometimes if I just quickly skim through something and you want more clarification, there's nothing called a stupid question, right? Questions are always good. In fact, we are, when we talk about the resurrection, we speak about the famous doubter, right? Thomas was apparently the one who came to India with the message, and Thomas had questions, and we actually simply categorize Thomas and say, oh, he's the doubter. But even all the other disciples, they also doubted. I mean, we see that when the women came and told Peter and the other apostles, they basically said, I mean, you're not talking sense. I mean, this is nonsense. And they actually run to the tomb, and they also doubted, but Thomas was not there with them. And Jesus initially appeared, and therefore he still had his doubts. So doubts are not the same as unbelief. Doubts are sometimes gives the context for our confidence and faith. It is through the furnace of doubt, as an eminent writer, a novelist, Fyodor Dostoevsky, said that it is through the furnace of doubt that that I raise my hosanna. So sometimes it is through doubts that God leads us to greater and greater revelations about himself. So note down your doubts, your concerns, your questions, and feel free to ask them. Feel emboldened to ask questions towards the end. Now, back in 1966, we are now in April 2021. In April of 1966, which was about 45 years ago, the Time magazine, the prestigious Time magazine, ran a cover which said, "Is God dead? Is God dead?" And it was actually in the backdrop of a very academic pushback against the belief in God. In the 18th century, in the 19th century, different, in fact, across not just sciences, but across domains, psychology, philosophy, the sciences, and across domains, there was a collective attack against Christianity in particular, but also against theism, or the belief in God in general, that there is no need for God. Science has sorted things out. We do not need a divine being, who actually, we don't need a God to explain things. We can do things by ourselves. So there was a big pushback against the belief in God. And it was in that context that the Time magazine ran this cover in 1966, asking this question, which is not really a question. It is rather a rhetorical question, which means that it is actually in the affirmative that God is dead, right? So it actually ran a cover saying, "Is God dead? Is God dead?" Let me note in passing that I think about 4 years later, although that cover is not in the screen, because we are not actually talking about God's existence today. But usually when I talk about God's existence, I have, instead of the "Is truth dead," the 1969 cover of Time magazine had a question which said, "Is God coming back to life?" What happened between 1966 and 1969? In those 3 years, there was a counter pushback. God actually came back to academia. Now, and since then, right, in philosophy and in sciences, several findings have actually lent more strength to the premises that we use for God's existence, that there is something that transcends the natural world, and therefore we are justified in believing in God. So that was 1969. Time went by. So is God dead? 1966. Now cut and move fast forward to 2017, when the Time magazine used the very font and the color and the contrast that it used for the 1966 cover and ran this question: is truth dead? Actually, it was in a more political context that question was raised, but the question is a hard-hitting one: is truth dead? The point is this: once you take God out of the picture, once you remove God, then what you're left with is that you do not have a standard for truth. You do not have a standard for truth. And when I speak about truth, I'm speaking about objective truth in general, but also most importantly about moral truths. Because God is that ultimate good that defines everything else. Even when you say that there is so much evil in the world, you're actually comparing with a standard and saying that there is something wrong with the world. So for example, it was C.S. Lewis who said that, how can I know that a line is crooked? We can know a line is crooked because we have the sense of a straight line. And if you have a straight line, you can know that something is wrong with this line is crooked. So there is this ultimate good. If you take that ultimate good away, then you cannot even define evil and good, or even moral truths cannot be defined without God. That was the argument that C.S. Lewis raised. And so once we thought that God is dead, what we ultimately come to is the inference, the hard-hitting inference, the inference that probably we don't really like to hear, but that is what follows. The inference is this: the truth too is dead. There is nothing called truth. There is no reference point, and therefore there is nothing called truth. In fact, although I didn't want to take you to that scripture, but probably in passing, if you come to the last verse of Judges, you can actually note the very same thing. The last verse of Judges chapter 21. And in fact, if you read the book of Judges very closely, the moral depravity during the time of Judges mimics the time that we are living in, right? It is very much the same. And the last verse of Judges, which is Judges 21 verse 25, says, in those days there was no king in Israel, and each one did what was right in his own eyes. There was no king in Israel, and each one did what was right in his own eyes. Probably I'll come to that verse later as well. So the point is that if there is no king, if there is no authority, then each person becomes his or her own king, his or her own reference. There is the self-autonomy that takes over, because there is no ultimate autonomy to decide what is good, what is wrong, what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is evil. So that is the ultimate, after product of atheism, or the view that there is no God. So what do you really end up with? You end up with the view that truth is dead. But what am I actually implying here? What is 2 plus 2? If you can see my screen, 2 plus 2 is equal to what? Here I'll just say a small humorous story, and from there, I'll just connect from there, and we can move forward. The story is about a junior, let's say a preschool teacher who taught her students that 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. And then the day of the test came, and there was this one young boy who gave a wrong answer to the question. He wrote 22. 2 plus 2 is equal to 22. So the teacher called him over and said that, kid, that this is wrong. And what is 2 plus 2? 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. And the boy got really angry, and he said, no, 2 plus 2 is not equal to 4. 2 plus 2 is equal to 22. So the teacher, tried to calm him down and said, okay, let me explain to you in this way. The teacher said, she took 2 pens and said, this is 2. This is 2. If you put this together, how many pens do you have? The boy still insisted 22. And out of rage, he just, scattered across the pen box, and he just ran away. And the teacher was left very uncomfortable. I mean, how can you deal with an angry, adamant kid? Yeah, how can you actually deal with an adamant, angry kid? And the kid was actually persisting, and he ran off. And then he went home, and the next day, so what the teacher decided was to call his parents over, and she calls his parents over and says, we had a test, and your son wrote 2 + 2 = 22, and he was upset when I noted that it was wrong. And the parents, the color of their face changes, the mood of their face changes, and they reply, "Who are you to tell my kids that 2 + 2 = 4? I mean, why are you trying to force your truth on my children?" And they go and complain to the principal. The principal comes over and meets the teacher and says, I heard that so and so happened. Yeah, and she said, yeah, I mean, I don't know how to handle the situation. I was surprised to see that even the parents were behaving like this. And the principal said, that was not fine. In fact, we'll have to suspend you for a few days. You're not supposed to force your truth upon others. You keep your truth to yourself. The teacher was completely taken aback. And what on earth is happening in the world? And she suspended. Then the story leaks out. The media picks it up. And in the days that follow, the media pressurizes the school that, so much bigotry is there, that there is one teacher who is forcing down her view of the truth down the throats of little kids. This is bigotry, this is intolerant, so on and so forth. And finally the school has to take action against this teacher, and they decide to fire her, basically to fire her. And then she's called for that final settlement. And when she comes in for the final settlement, the news has got bigger, the media has turned up, and for the final settlement, the principal walks over, the camera is rolling, and he says, "We thank you, Miss So-and-so, for all your services, and this is your final settlement. For your last month's pay, $2,000, and for this month's pay, $2,000, that's $4,000. And there's a pause of silence, and the teacher returns that, wait, there's a problem there. 2,000 plus 2,000 is not 4,000, it's 22,000. And the principal's jaw drops, and he cannot give an answer because it's in front of all to see. And that's how that story comes to a close. You see, we actually do not, we will go to any extent, or when I say we, I'm talking about the society in general, to defend absurd theories about truth until the rubber really hits the road and it matters to us. It matters to us, right? It is about us, or it is one of us. We'll talk about morality not being objective and all of that, but until it applies to us, until we are the ones who are wronged. So that is what happens when you take a view of truth that undermines reality. And we are in the Passion Week. So let's read a passage from the Bible itself and then get started from there. What is truth? That's the famous question that the Roman governor Pontius Pilate raised within his chambers when he met the one who was the very embodiment of truth. Pilate said to him, this is from John chapter 18 towards the end. Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this very purpose I have come to the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. I have come into the world to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Now Pilate responds, which could arguably be one of the most powerful questions ever asked. Pilate responded saying, "What is truth?" What is truth? And that very question actually echoes down the centuries. Even today, that's the question that we see raised all the time. What really is truth? Is it an abstract idea? Is it a concept? What really is truth? And we cannot even infer from that passage. If you go to John chapter 18, and that's how that chapter comes to an end. Pilate is asking, what is truth? And we read that he just walked away. And we cannot even infer what the real attitude of Pilate was. And because the writer does not explicitly state that, it is fair to assume a different, ways we can imagine what that attitude was. Perhaps it was out of awe, that he really wanted to know what was truth. He was really caught off guard by the authority with which Jesus spoke to him, by the clarity with which Jesus spoke to him. And therefore he was out of awe that he asked that question. That could be a possibility. But the other possibility is that he was simply mocking, or he was simply, it was like, I don't really care. What on earth is truth? So we see that those two different attitudes even today. There are people who respond with an inquisitive mind, that they want to know what really is truth. But there are also people, I don't really care. It's your thing. I don't really care what the truth is. And this particular conversation, the secular historian Will Durant calls this conversation the most important conversation in history, because he says this is where the kingdom of God, or Christ, met Caesar. Caesar being Rome, was that tall, powerful kingdom of that day, that big empire of that day. And when Jesus stood before the representative of that greatest empire of that day, and when he spoke about truth, what he was ultimately saying was that the truth will take over the world. And as he said, 300 or 400 years down the line, where was Rome? Rome was gone into history. All the great empires, the powerful empires that stood on human foundations, those empires, they come and went away. But the very fact that Jesus said about his kingdom, which is not of this world, the truth that he proclaimed is still in the 21st century. It is still expanding and counting. Across continents, that kingdom is still strong. It is standing on the ruins of fallen empires. It is still strong, and it is marching forward in all of its authority and glory. So that was a truth that Jesus proclaimed. The philosopher Francis Bacon, on his, he begins his essay on truth. It's titled On Truth. With this particular incident, he says, "What is truth?" said a jesting Pilate, and would not stay for an answer. "What is truth?" said a mocking Pilate, a jesting Pilate, and would not stay for an answer. He just walked away. He just mocked and walked away. He probably did not really care about what this babbler had to say. He walked away. So let's tone it down a bit. You see two people on your screen whom you're probably very familiar with if there are soccer fans here. And obviously, if you take any bunch of 10 people, you'll at least get 3 or 4 people who are interested in football. And if I ask you who is the best soccer player, I'm pretty sure that I'll get, some people might say, is there anyone who is, who thinks it's Messi? Just raise your hand. Yeah, there are people raising hands. So now you can stop. So I can at least see 5 people who have raised their hand. How many think? Oh, 6. Okay. So let's, we can at least take a vote here. So 6 people think that it's Messi. And how many think that it is Ronaldo? So the people who have raised their hand, you'll have to lower your hand, please. How many of y'all think that it is Ronaldo? Ronaldo is the best soccer player today. I can 7, 8. Oh, so we have a majority or 9. So I think that at least in this crowd, most are Ronaldo fans. So you see, there are 6 people, or I can see 10. So there was, okay, you can lower your hands. So there were 6 people who said that Messi is the best player, and you have about 10 people who think that it's Ronaldo. Now, if I really ask, or if I what, first of all, we'll I'll just quickly make a comment about this, the nature of this question itself, and then a more broader comment on how it really applies to truth. Now, first of all, you don't really get, you do get emotional when you're talking about, if I defend Messi and say that Messi is the best player, and the other one says it's Ronaldo, so there will be emotional exchange, but that is not something that will break our friendship, right? We still think that we have freedom to discuss and talk about our favorite, or what we think is the best soccer player, or the best cricketer, or the best let's say, a book or whatever, you can actually, you think that we have the, I mean, that is not a controversial issue. And we think that we can actually have the conversation in and around these things. That's number one. So there is no such emotional, let's say, I mean, you don't get shut down because you have an opinion to say on this. That's number one. Number two, notice the nature of this question. The nature of this question is subjective. It is your taste. It is your preference. It is not something that is, I mean, if we had all the required variables, or all the data that we require to compare these players, we could probably give an objective answer. I mean, that objective answer might not, I mean, if that objective answer comes out to be, let's say, Messi is the best player, the Ronaldo players, fans would be disappointed, but then that could be the objective answer. In case of such comparisons, it's very difficult to come to an objective answer, but probably someone who knows everything, let's say, has infinite knowledge, can make a comparison and say who's the best. So when you guys answer something, and some answered saying that it is Messi, and some others responded by saying it is Ronaldo, what you guys were saying was not about the reality, but it was about your own taste, about your own preferences. So that is a view of truth. I mean, we'll look at it with more clarity going forward, what that view of truth is. But before we do that, quickly, I just want to take you through what is called the laws of logic, the 3 rules of thought. And these 3 rules of thought are something that we apply across fields. If you're doing mathematics, you're doing any, I mean, you make any decisions in your day-to-day life, you apply these 3 laws of logic. What are they? The law of identity. The example that I've given below it, a rose is a rose is a rose is a rose, is from a famous poem by the American poet Gertrude Stein. So that's an example of the law of identity. I mean, it's simple. I'll just explain it to you. So if I say that this is a mobile phone, this is a mobile phone, right? I mean, in fact, everything is identical to itself. I mean, it is whole in itself. So for example, if I refer to something, I mean, let's say we just refer to Ronaldo, right? And immediately both of us understood, or all of us in the room understood whom I'm talking to. So we know who Ronaldo is. So Ronaldo is Ronaldo, irrespective of the fact that even if I didn't have a picture in front of me and I'm talking about something, we can understand that because of the rule of identity. That there is, if we refer to something, and I mean, if the speech is assigned to it, then we know that what is being referred to. The law of identity, not something that is very important at this point, but the next one is really important. The law of non-contradiction, which literally means that contradictory statements cannot be true. So if, let's say, I say that there is a dog in my backyard, okay, and that's a statement that I'm making. Either that statement is true or it's false. I mean, either there is a dog in my backyard, if I have a backyard, or there is no dog in my backyard. Both of the statements cannot be true at the same time. I mean, so it's self-explanatory. I mean, if you just look at the law itself, law of non-contradiction, which means that contradicting statements cannot be true at the same time, right? If you say that someone is a boy, he's a boy. He cannot be a boy and a girl at the same time. So as a matter of fact, if I make a statement of fact, that is exclusive. I mean, the opposite of that cannot be true at the very same time. So that is a law of non-contradiction. And then you have the law of excluded middle, which means that, which is in some ways connected to the previous one, that for every statement, it is either true or false. There is nothing in between, which means that if I say there's a dog in my backyard, there is a dog in my backyard, or there is no dog in my backyard, there is no other middle option, right? It is either true or false. So for example, let's say if I say that Jesus is God, it is either that Jesus is God, or he is not God. I mean, there is no middle ground. Christianity is true, it is true, or it is false. There is no middle ground. Okay, there is no all-inclusive ground, so to speak. Okay, so now we go on to something a little meatier. So here, I would really appreciate for you guys to, if you have questions, just note it down. We'll quickly go through 2 different views of truth, which are very popular in your college campuses. You will see it appear in different forms. People raise these views in probably they don't know what this view is, but they will exhibit this view, and you'll come to see it more clearly as we go forward. First view is that truth is relative. So if you see slogans like "My body, my choice," or you see T-shirts, people wearing T-shirts which say "My life, my rules," these are very common sayings, right? That is a view that is called relativism. I mean, just keep that ism outside. The view that truth is relative, that it is, I can define my own truth and you can define your own truth, and we can just go on, or we can just go along without crossing each other's territory. You keep your truth to yourself, I'll keep my truth to myself. So there is my truth and your truth. We can all define our own truth, because truth is relative, it is not absolute. So this is a very prevalent idea that you come across in college campuses, especially when you're talking about Jesus, or when you're talking about things like, I mean, you will again, and ironically, you will not be cancelled if you're talking about your best soccer player or something like that. But when you're talking about more serious things that actually should be discussed, people might just shut you down as a bigot, intolerant, and all of that. And we'll just go through those objections as well as we go along. So what is this view? This view implies that each person can define his own truth. As I said, each person can define his own truth. So truth can be considered in the relativistic viewpoint. Truth is like your own preferences. It's like ice cream. You like vanilla flavor, I like chocolate, right? So as I noted in the previous example of the soccer example, notice what is the problem with this statement. You like vanilla, I like chocolate. So truth is like this, it's like preferences. There is no objective external standard which will apply to all people. If truth is a matter of preference, then it will not really apply to all people at all times and all places. So before we debunk this, this is the idea of truth in a relativistic viewpoint. We will see how we can actually, untie this and, respond to such a view when it shows up, when we are talking with or we are discussing the gospel with our friends. So this view is not just about, not something that, people today, or let's say secular atheist race. It is also something that can be found even in our good Hindu friends, right? Even they sometimes exhibit this view of truth. For example, J. Krishnamurti was an Indian Hindu philosopher. He says, I maintain that truth is a pathless land. You cannot approach it by any path whatsoever, by any religion, by any sect. This is my point of view, and I adhere to it absolutely and unconditionally. Notice what he said. He said that truth is a pathless land. There is no way whatsoever, there is no path to truth through any religion, through any sect. It is contradicting. Remember the law of contradiction. It is contradicting what Jesus said. Jesus said, I am the truth. There is no path to God except through me. There is no way to God. I am the way. I am the truth. No one comes to the Father except through me. So Jesus defined Jesus would have said the very opposite of what Krishnamurti is saying here. But this is his view, right? He says, this is my view, my point of view. And notice what he says next. He says, I adhere to it absolutely and unconditionally. In fact, in the last statement, he made a very self-defeating statement of his very view. Remember, the view is called relative. The truth is relative. Each person can have his own relative truth. Truth is not an unconditional and absolute claim. But what Krishnamurti is saying here is that I am defining this, and I want people, I myself adhere to it absolutely. But that is ultimately a bogus claim, because if you hold to a view that truth is relative, then how on earth can you actually also affirm at the same time that very truth absolutely and unconditionally? So relativism is self-defeating. It is actually cutting the branch on which it constructs the view. How does it do that? So when a relativist, just don't, I hope the word relativist is just simply someone who regards truth to be relative, your truth, my truth. So when a person like that says that truth is relative, he is insisting that that view is absolutely true. Okay. So when someone says that truth is relative, at least that very statement has to be absolutely true. And that is self-defeating, because the very axiom that you're stating, that truth is relative, at least that very statement has to be absolutely true. So the relativistic position ends up being a self-defeating claim. Another example would be that, what do these people generally say? They say that, we promote tolerance, right? Because we don't want to, we each of us have our own truth and we can live by that truth. And therefore, by that, we can actually promote tolerance. But here's the problem. They're at least assuming for their position, they're defining an exception to the norm that tolerance is a universal value. It is a universal virtue, right? So at least tolerance has to be something that is absolute and objective. Again, they're doing a special pleading, as we call it. They're defining an exception to the norm, and therefore it ends up being a self-defeating claim. Denial of absolute truth requires a person to affirm it at the same time. If you're denying that there is an absolute truth, at least the statement that there is no absolute truth has to be, at least that statement has to be absolutely true. And if that statement is absolutely true, then relativism is false. That view is false. Now, is truth a personal preference? Going back to that vanilla, chocolate distinction, consider the statement. I'll give you another statement. So I'm just giving you a couple of examples here. I like banana. So that is like, I like vanilla, I like chocolate. This is a preference. This is a statement that we can call about the subject, right? This is a subjective statement. It is about me. It is not about the object. This statement is nothing about banana itself. It is about me. I like banana or not. It is not about banana. So this statement is a subjective statement about me. But consider the next statement. Bananas are good for digestion. Bananas are good for digestion. Now, this is a statement of fact. This is not a statement that is about me. This is a statement about bananas. It's a statement about the fruit. So regardless of the fact that I like banana or I do not like banana, it does not flutter the truth about bananas that it is really good for digestion. So this is a statement about the object. It's an objective statement. So truth, notice this, truth does not lie in the eye of the beholder. We can have subjective perceptions about what we see, but what we think or what we believe will have no bearing on what the truth is. We cannot construct our own truth. For a long time, people believed that the sun is coming around the earth. I mean, for a large part of history, like a majority of history, believed that to be the case. But because they believed it, they could not make it happen that way. I mean, the truth was still that, it was the earth that was going around the sun and not the other way. So truth will have no bearing on what our personal perceptions are. In other words, truth is not subjective, it is objective. It is objective, it is about the object. Or the second view, so that was the relativistic view, the view that says my truth versus your truth. The second view is the view that truth is plural. A very common view, again, that you will see in your college campus, which basically says, so if the relative view of truth is that my truth versus your truth, or the plural view of truth is, as the word indicates, the truth itself is plural. There are so many truths, there are so many gods, there are so many religions that are equally true at the same time. Each and every view is equally valid. That is the view of pluralism, truth pluralism, that all religions are fundamentally the same. I mean, we all teach goodness, the golden rule, this, that, and this is something that commonly people raise, that we are all fundamentally the same. So that is the view of the pluralist, the one who says that truth is plural. So what we hold as truths are a product. So in this view, what we believe as true is a product of our culture, our origin, our geography. So if you're born in India, you are most likely a Hindu. If you're born in somewhere in Europe, you will probably be a secular atheist, maybe in some other Western country, which is still Christian, heavily Christian, you may be a Christian. So your beliefs or what the truths that you hold to are some, in this view, they are the product of our culture, our origin, our cultural geography, etc. Now let's consider this. Islam and Buddhism, two major world religions. Now remember, the reason I went through the laws of logic was because you'll have to apply it here. Okay. So Islam teaches that there is a personal God, right? It teaches that God created the world. It teaches that man is sinful, man will spend eternity, there's just one life, and then he will spend eternity in heaven or hell. And salvation is by faith and good works. That's what Islam will teach. What about Buddhism? Buddhism, again, I mean, is the exact contradiction of the very claims of Islam. It says that God is not personal. The world was not created. Man is not sinful. Man is not an enduring self. It's rebirth and reincarnation. And there is no salvation. What ultimately happens to nirvana is annihilation of suffering and pain. So that is the Buddhist claim. That is the Buddhist view. You see that when you apply the laws of logic here, when you apply the laws of, let's say, non-contradiction here, this violates the very fundamental laws of reality, the laws of logic that we constantly apply in mathematics. So, I mean, if you're solving a problem and you come to the bottom and you see that LHS or the left-hand side is not equal to the right-hand side, you cannot force them to be equal if they are unequal. So when they are making contradictory statements, they are making contradictory statements. And fundamentally, so if you go back to what the pluralist would say, that they are fundamentally the same, when you really test it out against one religion against the other, or one major worldview against the other, you can also add Hinduism and Christianity and all of those worldviews in a single screen, and you can compare the fundamental claims, you will see that they contradict fundamentally. So is truth really a product of culture? As I said, the pluralist will say that if you're born in India, you're a Hindu. If you're born in Pakistan, you would be a Muslim, and so on. Most of us, I probably believe that, majority of us today are Christians. The very fact that we are Christians in India would actually violate or, disprove this claim that the pluralists would make. In essence, our beliefs are a product of, so what they would say is that in essence, that our beliefs are a product of culture and time. That is what this view would actually say. But consider this. If you lived thousands of years ago, as I said, you would have believed that the sun goes around the earth, or the universe eternally existed before the Big Bang theory came to the scene. That's what people would have believed. But that doesn't really make it true. The time or the culture that you are born and where you are born, the geography that you're born, and the knowledge that is available to that geography has no bearing on the truth, which is external of that. So where you're born, or you're born in some family, and your familial values and beliefs you take on. For example, there were cultures in Africa that thought that it was absolutely fine to slay your brother and have him for dinner. I mean, the cannibal culture really existed until a few centuries ago. If you just go 100 years back, we had practices like sati in India, where an entire culture thought that it was absolutely fine for the woman to jump into the pyre of her husband and give her life. So those were the product of the culture. But the fact that the cultures believe that, does that really make them true? Does that mean that murder is not right, or that such forms of practices are moral? Definitely not. So these views have no, or the reality of truth will not have any bearing on where you're born and how you come to believe what you believe. Suppose if you, I mean, again, this is the example that I gave of cannibalism, same thing. So this line of reasoning is a logical fallacy, right? Philosophers identify false reasoning or wrong reasoning. You can read up more on genetic fallacies, just note it down and read upon it later. So when someone is arguing like this and making such claim, just call out this fallacy in a very compassionate manner. This is called genetic fallacy, that because you're born in some context, some cultural context, that does not mean that what you believe is true, right? It has no bearing on the truth, right? Where you're born, in what culture, in what society, in what time, has no bearing on the truth of your belief. Now, another most famous objection that you bump into all the time could be this, that isn't it intolerant to say that truth is exclusive? When we actually make a claim that Jesus is the only way to God, that's a problem. That is a problem that they will raise. I mean, that's not something that they can let's say accept. So is that really intolerant? Is it really intolerant? So they would say that it is intolerant to claim that truth is exclusive. This again commits a fallacy which is called ad hominem. Forget the word. The fallacy is simple, that for the sake of for the sake of the argument, let's assume, let's grant them that, okay, we are, there's a character problem with us, that we are being bigots, we are being intolerant. But even if we are intolerant in that claim, that would still not have any bearing on what we are claiming, the truth of our belief. That will still not have any bearing. Consider this example. An arrogant scientist, so he has a character flaw, he will come up with a cure for COVID-19. So would you reject his thesis, or what his invention is, based on his character? You will not. So what he brings to the table, or what his thesis, or what his belief, or what in this case, what the cure that he puts forward is to be judged based on its own validity, not the character of the person who's actually making that claim. So that is called an ad hominem. You are attacking the character, not the claim or the argument that he's making. So, but are we really is there a character problem when we are actually making a statement like this? No. The claim is based, I'm sorry, there's a small typo there. The claim is based on a false definition of tolerance, not truth, of tolerance. The claim is based on a false or a wrong definition of tolerance. What really is tolerance? Today, we think that tolerance is simply accepting all religions to be true. If you go back to the Roman world, when Christianity actually broke to the scene, it was the view that the Romans wanted, or the society then wanted the Christians to actually worship all the gods of that era. And it was because they refused to do that they were put to death, right? And today we have the very counter, let's say, perspective that is tabled, that basically the ones who speak for exclusive truths, they are the ones who are intolerant. So, you see how the times have changed. Anyway, this is based on a false definition of tolerance. Tolerance, when you're talking to a skeptic, when you're talking to an outsider, just have this conversation probably as a, let's say, to lay the floor for what you're going to build next. That tolerance is not, I repeat that, it is not accepting contradicting positions, because that would violate the laws of logic that you apply for virtually everything else that you do. It is not accepting all contradicting positions, but respecting people and their beliefs. We respect people. They have their own beliefs. They have their own religious rituals. We respect them, but we do not accept them, and we strongly proclaim what we know to be the truth. So tolerance is not, we cannot accept all, that would be ignorance, right? That is logical ignorance. It is not tolerance, accepting claims that are contradictory, just like I noted in the comparison between Buddhism and Islam. These religions would make fundamentally different claims. Finally, is truth knowable? That there would be people who would simply say that, we cannot, the point is that we cannot know the truth, right? We simply have to, we all follow different religions, but we cannot simply know the truth. But how can we know the truth? We can definitely know it. These are some, it's called the, let's say, the correspondence theory of truth, right? That we can define, or we can understand truth if it actually corresponds to the reality of what we are trying to explain. I'll just break it down for, after I lay the points down. For a statement to be true, it must be factual. Okay, that's number two. It must not internally contradict. It must be livable, and it should explain the reality of what it seeks to explain. So number one, truth must correspond to reality. Suppose, let's say, different theories come forward to explain a scientific phenomenon, right? Eventually, that model or that theory that best explains the reality of what it is trying to explain is the one that is accepted by the scientific community. And probably, for that very same phenomenon, sometime later, 100 or 200 or maybe 10 or 20 years later, some other theory might come in place which does a better job at explaining the phenomenon, and therefore that theory might replace the current theory. Right? For example, you had the steady state model of the universe. which at some point had a consensus, but then you had the Big Bang cosmology, which now has the consensus among cosmologists. So just like that, you can think of religions or worldviews, even atheism. Atheism is also a worldview. You can put these worldviews together, and then you can see that which worldview best explains the reality that we see, the reality that we understand, which is the best explanation of the real facts. So that is the correspondence theory of truth. That is how we know truth. And when you come, I mean, obviously you cannot compare all the worldviews that there is, but I'll just come to it later, how we can actually narrow it down to Christianity. So that is number one. Number two, statement. For a statement to be true, it must be factual. It must have some relation with facts. It must not internally contradict, right? It cannot make claims that that contradict itself. For example, to give a quick example, pantheistic religions like Buddhism and Hinduism have an internal contradiction at the very heart, right? For example, when they say pantheism does not believe, or it's called non-dualism. It does not believe in the existence of souls or personal agents, right? But still, they would argue for something called reincarnation or rebirth, which is based on your previous karma, your good deeds, your bad deeds. Your next birth would be defined. But at the same time, pantheism denies the existence of an ultimate soul, an ultimate being, God. It's inherently non-theistic. Then if there is no ultimate being like that, how can you decide or arbitrate or judge the moral acts of the past and decide what the next life should be? You see, there is an internal contradiction within the very system of its fundamental beliefs that would defeat its key premises. So that is internal contradiction. It is not livable. Now, this is also a very interesting point that I can just quickly mention, that if you look at some worldviews, right, consider worldviews like Buddhism or Hinduism. These worldviews are basically based on enlightenment. That, in fact, Buddha, the word Buddha, his actual name was Siddhartha. He took the title Buddha, and his followers he called Buddhist. What does the word Buddha mean? The word Buddha means enlightened one. So in worldviews like Buddhism, it treats humans, it treats us like some spiritual beings that can actually, through meditation, through rituals, we can transcend the current state, and we can attain that nirvana. We can attain that divine state, that spiritual state. So that is one side. That's how some worldviews would define the lived reality of what we are, that we are basically spiritual, enlightened beings. On the other hand, you have worldviews like atheism and materialism, right? That basically says that, you are just a blind product of matter and time and chance. And, you're just a bundle of atoms. You die and decompose. There is nothing spiritually or ultimately significant about you. That is one view. So you have these different worldviews that have these two different diametrically opposite views about man, about the lived reality of what it means to be a human. Now enter Christianity. Christianity actually is the only worldview that actually brings the two together. That when you look at yourself, you can see the divine imprint, the imago Dei, the image of God. That in Psalm 8, the psalmist cries out, when I consider the heavens, the work of your fingers, what is man that you are mindful of him, the son of man that you care for him. You made him a little lower than the angels, but you clothed him with glory and honor. So you can see that that glory of man, that, let's say, that divine imprint of man attested in the Christian worldview. But on the other hand, you can also see the depravity of man when Paul, for example, cries out, "Oh, the wretched man that I am." There's a wretchedness that we can see within ourselves. And the Christian worldview best explains that reality. When you look at ourselves, right, sometimes we can see that we are a wondrous creation. There is something very, 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 very special about human beings. But at the same time, we can also see that desperate helplessness in this magnificent universe, where we look out and we cry out to the cross. That's a Christian message, right? So these two diametrically opposite poles that are, all the worldviews either highlight one of these two extremes, but Christianity explains this lived reality through the through the fact of the original sin, that we were created with the image of God, but we tarnished that very image of God. And because we tarnished and because we fell, the one who was really God, he incarnated in human flesh. He, we bore the image of God, but we tarnished it. But Colossians 1 verse 15 says, he, Christ, is the image of the invisible God. And he was the true image of God. And now again in Colossians chapter 2, we read that we are being, Colossians chapter 3, that we are being conformed to that image. So we can see that those two, extremes are brought neatly together. So it should explain the reality of what it seeks to explain. That is one of the major criteria how you can understand that one worldview is true or not. And because Ashish explained it yesterday, I probably hope that most of you did attend. Otherwise, please check that that video. Christianity gives you a default hypothesis, a hypothesis which can be tested. No other worldview does that. And because we're talking during an Easter time, I can just give you a small exercise after the session. Go to YouTube, try to find academic debates between Christians and skeptics. You will find lots of them. Now, after that, just try to find between Muslims and skeptics, or I'm talking about scholars in proper academic, proper university setting, okay? Not some random people. I'm talking about academic philosophers, historians, scientists, debating in academic university settings, in proper academic settings. You will not find Muslims or Hindus or people of other worldviews debating like the Christian scholars do. They will debate on the existence of God or things like that. For example, you will find Muslim scholars debating on the existence of God, because basically we both Christians and Muslims can use the very same arguments for God's existence to prove that, but they will not defend the truth of their worldview. They will not have and take up conversations like these. But you will have Christian scholars in academic settings defending the null hypothesis of Christianity, which is the resurrection of Jesus. So therefore, we see that there is a certain correspondence to reality that we can see in Christianity alone. So that is how we can actually identify and understand the truth of Christianity. Apart from you don't really have to go and look at every worldview out there, but you can just ask for a worldview to present. What is that default hypothesis that you can you can give me, that I can basically check and I can see whether it corresponds to reality, whether it explains the facts as they are, and I can probably arrive at truth. So that is the way in which scholars and experts of religions, that is how they evaluate the truth of any particular worldview. That's how you test the truth of any particular worldview. So that was my last slide. Basically, I think I also had some book references to give. One of them is Greg Kaukel's book on truth relativism, and then there's a book by Paul Copen. I'll just put those in the chats. You can probably take up those books and read further for your knowledge. I'll give it back to Pastor Franklin. I mean, if there are questions, please feel free to raise it.